So, when I was doing the deep dive yesterday, go back to my last video about Erica Kirk, because since this all happened, and I said this on Birdie's Live, I have been wavering back and forth about Erica. Meaning, there was times in her commentary, her physical presence, her speeches, her conversations, her reaction to everything initially. I went from genuine, obvious, like, horror and felt so terrible for her and sad for her and genuinely just couldn't believe how she was getting through this so publicly and right away thrust into this and holding up seemingly so strong and thinking how noble and wonderful that was, to then glimpses of this and this gut feeling of something feels off about her. Her husband was just murdered in front of the entire country and internationally. This is the biggest story in the world right now. And the guttural reaction and not even knowing him was so intense. I couldn't even imagine that being the person I love so deeply and spend my life with and am married to. And I am out here basically running TPUSA ads in every single one of my speeches. At some point, I go from being somebody who's very, sad and grief-stricken and crying to somebody who dabs the tears and somehow managed to flawlessly deliver a TPUSA commercial and ease her donors' minds, right? So I'd go like, I'm not sure. Well, what kicked me into overdrive this week to say, okay, I have to go with my gut on this, and I have to research this woman and look into some more things about her, as much as I can find, is this week when she sat down for the Charlie Kirk Show, his former podcast, with all of his partners, like Andrew Colvett, and her entire demeanor, the topic of conversation, or should we say what wasn't being discussed, that everybody else seems to be talking about, is the oddities surrounding Charlie Kirk's murder. I mean, it's unavoidable. The story's not adding up. And for some reason, you are sitting in your husband's podcasting chair with all of his partners, and you guys aren't talking about that. You're talking about TPUSA, plans into the future, events you have planned, and kind of carrying on in a way that made me too uncomfortable to ignore. Because now I've seen her enough to where that wavering feeling is now, I'm officially waved into a direction where my gut cannot be ignored. I can't ignore this feeling that I get now and how she's behaving, sounding, and acting. So this is why I started researching her. And in my last video, I found that Erica, since 2006, has started, at least I can find, 7 or 8 organizations that in articles have been recognized globally and internationally, that became at least big enough to have their own offshoots that were another organization, all 501(c)(3)s except for the clothing company. But in every single one of these endeavors, there's no financials. Now, if you're a 501(c)(3) in America, you have to file a 990 form. And it's all publicly available information, because that's what you have to do in order to get this tax-exempt status. Everybody does. But for some reason, not Erica Francie, who was now Erica Kirk. And this is going to bring me to my next point about NGOs, charities, 501(c)(3)s. And I'm going to quote Mike Benz on this so you can understand where my thinking is and why. Okay? Okay, so Mike Benz states, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they are the stem cell of the U.S. central nervous system. They are this highly flexible tool, just like a stem cell, that can transform into any of the 220 different cell types in the human body, and they self-renew, and they can generate all these new neurons. That is, you really can't disentangle or really separate the government from the non-profits, non-governmental organizations. Its origin started with the income tax creation in 1913, and then in 1917, contributions to charitable organizations to the 501(c)(3)s, as we now know it today, became tax deductible from this new income tax. And so it gave a rise to this money flow into private foundations and into nonprofit organizations that would come to play a larger role, a key role, in being a deniable front to run money, to establish contacts, and to provide direction and guidance to groups that the government did not want to be caught necessarily doing direct business with. And so it gave a rise to this money flow into private foundations and into nonprofit organizations that would come to play a larger role, a key role in being a deniable front to run money, to establish contacts, and to provide direction and guidance to groups that the government did not want to be caught necessarily doing direct business with. So what does this mean? When I can't find financials on any of the organizations that Erica Franci, now Erica Kirk, was bragging about since 2006, and every time she had an article written about her or platform, she always said that her most important work was her charity work, was her philanthropic efforts, philanthropy, and somehow all of those organizations seem to bypass every single legal norm regarding tax filings of Form 990, that there's not a single financial document I can find on any of these organizations that show revenue, expenses, liability, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Go back in my video, and I turned over every possible rock. And every time you don't get a financial anything, the excuse is always, well, some 501(c)(3)s might be too small, meaning they take in under $50,000. So that might not be publicly available if it's too small. But these organizations weren't too small. These organizations that she ran, Everyday Heroes, was working with high-ranking military officials, was working with the VA hospital in Washington, D.C., was working with the Humane Society throughout the country, was working internationally with orphanages in Romania, was going on patronages all over the world doing charity work through this Everyday Heroes. So it wasn't under $50,000 they were taking in. They were taking in what seems to be a lot more money, because at some point they had to create offshoots like Johnny's Locker and Pause for a Cause and Bible in 365. So this one organization churned out these 7 or 8 offshoots of 501(c)(3)s that had their own mission, that would have their own Form 990 and their own financial documents that, poof, don't exist. And what Mike Benz is saying, and I'm going to continue, is it's a complicated relationship because you have government agencies, then you have outside high net worth individuals and families, dynastic American families like the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, all these private philanthropies, all playing a role in U.S. statecraft, all having international businesses that rely on foreign markets. This is why I always say the story is really about the NGOs, those 501(c)(3)s, the charities, being no different than the government itself, a force within Washington that is bigger than the White House itself, where even Obama's national security advisor, Ben Rhodes, said it felt like we couldn't get the foreign policy carried out and done because this foreign policy establishment, this blob structure, seems to be more powerful than us. The blob has 3 levels to it. You have the guts of it inside the government, which is the State Department, Defense Department, the intelligence community, and USAID. Think of this as a 3D model: diplomacy, defense, and development. And the intelligence community the CIA, for example, plays a supporting role in those functions. And these are all merged together as one cohesive way of advancing U.S. foreign policy. But what it's really advancing is the interests of, generally speaking, the insiders, the elites, the multinational corporations. So the NGOs are helping the elites. You have this government structure at the center of it, and then below that you have the NGOs, the 501(c)(3)s, who are funded by the U.S. government and have longer reach than the U.S. government itself. The NGOs can serve as back channels, give plausible way of providing financial assistance or money or bribes to various groups to run shipments and arms, so guns and weapons, to create networks of assets that then assist the Secretary of State. So this network creation level, and there's this influence level at the bottom, but above that government level is what I call the donor drafter class, which is, and everyone understands the concept of big donors having big influence on politics. Not only do they largely play a key role in determining who's president through funding that they provide, but they draft off the policies off the US government. They don't just donate into it. They're the ones crafting the policy for the government. The Pentagon expedites, they make the moves for companies, for multinational corporations. The State Department does the same thing for multinational corporations and private equity funds and the whole financial overclass. And the CIA does this for corporations, financial firms, and the USAID does it for figures like Bill Gates, Soros, and the NGOs, the 501(c)(3)s, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, etc. So you have all of these corporations and financial firms attached to their philanthropy, and when they receive funding from the United States government, from USAID, of this portfolio, assets will, or their portfolio, NGOs or companies will also donate into it, because oftentimes they're actually paying into a government project that really advances some other secret interest. So let me say that again. So you have all of these corporations and financial firms attached to their philanthropy, and when they receive funding from the U.S. government, USAID, from the USAID portfolio, assets will, or their portfolio, NGOs or companies will also donate into it, because oftentimes they're actually paying into a government project that really advances some other secret interest. The operations officer for the CIA is where you get things like the cocaine cowboys, Barry Seal types, the kind of wild, crazy folks who go in and do the dirty work, like overthrowing democratically elected governments, coups. The CIA achieves these successful results and toppling of governments and their leaders by the government using the NGOs, the 501(c)(3)s, charity works, foundations, nonprofits, the NGO sphere, to funnel the money for these organized political warfare strategies. And George Kennan is the person who is the godfather of this political warfare strategy. George Kennan writes a memo from the State Department called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare. He lays out how this model blueprint for the American power in the 20th century, and that we need to overcome the basic distinction between peace and war that Americans have long believed there was, because the average American does not understand the intricacies of international relations. And you know who majored in international relations and double majored in poli-sci? Erica Franzi, now Erica Kirk. She just happened to be an international relations major. And like Mike Benn says, most Americans don't understand the intricacies of international relations. But what he really is trying to say is they don't understand how it really works. The funding, the NGOs, this blob. Okay, let's continue. So their thinking was, if we don't build an organized political warfare apparatus through the State Department intelligence function, then we will lose the American century. The problem to direct and fund this strategy, though, of political warfare is that everyday Americans would never vote on this or go for it or be okay with it, especially with our tax dollars, the State Department carrying out this political warfare strategy with our tax dollars. So in order to do this political warfare and carry this out, this ongoing political warfare project, they figured it would be ideal to have outside intelligence agencies take on this function, and that's what George Kennan called plausible deniability. The plausible deniability doctrine. He also laid out exhibits and contemplated ways to structure recommendations and proposals for structuring the CIA intelligence work through the NGOs, the 501(c)(3)s, the charity organizations, that would look like grassroots organizations helmed by fine, upstanding members of American society, kind of like our beauty pageant queen, Erica Franzi. And people in great repute, but really receive guidance and funding from the CIA, and constantly coordinating and taking orders from the CIA. But to the world, it looks like a charitable organization. So to all of us, American heroes, everyday heroes, the Bible 365, the Pause for a Cause, all of these charitable organizations Erica Kirk has started. Back then, Erica Franzi started when she was 17 years old somehow and became internationally and globally recognized, that we have no financial documents for, not a single 990 form filed, not a single revenue stream accounted for, right? Now that we're hearing what Mike Benz is describing as the statecraft, this political warfare strategy that George Kennan implemented into our government, the plausible deniability doctrine also infused into that, doesn't this sort of now describe what we're seeing here when it comes to why we can't find any financials on any of these global organizations, these global NGOs that Erica Franci started back in 2006 and kept coming up with new ones that we seem to have no financials for, where the funding came from, what the revenue stream was? Now, does this make a little bit more sense, maybe what was really going on here? The CIA has different cells. And so cells within the CIA, using these NGO fronts, these charitable organization fronts, essentially set off this NGO arms race, this proliferation of cells within American statecraft. The American business community within the American intelligence community, the national security community, to each create their own cellular circuit, really in order to advance their own interests. The thing people need to realize is the rogue elements of the NGOs, the 501(c)(3)s, the charitable organizations. So the State Department, Defense Department, CIA, also every major international corporation is wrapped up in this NGO flex and dependent on it to secure their market profitability and their revenues and their interests. So the NGO, the name itself, is purposefully misleading. The name NGO itself is purposely misleading. It's a misleading description because they're actually para-governmental. We are led to believe they are independent. They're non-governmental. But what they're really doing is providing a tax loophole and synchronize U.S. foreign policy interests and policy initiatives and the government projects that the government itself can't secure funds for or allocated to legally through Congress. So they can't, these government projects that the intelligence agencies want carried out, they can't get it done the right way through Congress and secure the funding for it. So they use the NGOs to secure the funding for it and carry it out. So they reach into the NGO sphere or private sector multinational companies to effectively co-sponsor and provide the top-up capital to get the amount of money they need to run these operations, and that's legal under the NGO tax loophole. It's beyond democratic control, but it shapes the fabric of what we consider democracy to be. These NGOs are a long arm of U.S. intelligence, U.S. statecraft, and is the long-term arm of that corporate financial donor drafter class with all their own secular dark side of global domination. Now, in my opinion, this could explain why we can't get the financials on any of Erica Franci, now Erica Kirk, and all of her 501(c)(3)s. Hope you enjoyed this video.